to come and address.
Thank you very much, members of the media, members of the listening and viewing public. The reason for providing you with those snippets from a number of statements made at different times in the last 3 years or so is to do two things. One, to give you the perspective against which we have just traveled to those energy companies, and two, to remind you that when it is said that on this matter of energy, that the government is acting in secret, that there is no support for a statement like that. In fact, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, having taken the office in September 9th, 2015, it was because I understood very clearly, and the government accepted, that notwithstanding the fact that we would like to be owners of a more diversified economy, and that there is need for us to do more in many other areas, that like the human body, if the backbone and the nervous system are infected and ailing, then powder in the face or going to the gym or keeping a good hairstyle would be always secondary. By this I mean that notwithstanding what else we may not be doing for and to and in the economy in Trinidad and Tobago, at this time and in the near and the medium term for sure, we have to take care of the business that pays our bills and finances our quality of life. And that area is the area of gas and to a lesser extent oil. To do otherwise would be to ensure that we fail completely. And those for whom the phrase failed state is an expectation or an announcement would be satisfied in saying, I told you so. Ladies and gentlemen, this government understood very clearly since 2015, in fact even before 2015, we understood that there was a crisis in the energy sector. Nobody in this country was prepared to confront that issue before September 9th, 2015. There was a government in this country, and there were pontificators and there were media personnel. But nobody was prepared to say that we were in a crisis situation with respect to the lifeblood of our economy and our well-being. Before we came into office, it was already beginning to happen that there was not sufficient gas going to plants at Point Lisas. Companies that were contracted with NGC were receiving less gas than the contracts called for. That being so, the NGC and by extension, the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago were legally exposed to serious claims for not satisfying those contracts. And of course, the shortfall to the various companies were resulting in loss of production, loss of earnings, loss of tax revenues, and so on and so on. This started before we came into office. It was raised in the media as we became aware of it. It was said that this development, which was quite worrisome, was only temporary, caused by maintenance work on some of our energy installations. And the then minister told us that as soon as the maintenance was over, we would go back to normalcy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with the reflection of time, we have come to see what that statement really meant and what it replaced. The truth of the matter is that there was not enough gas, and there, even as I speak to you today, even though we have in recent times taken steps to move our production up from 3.3 BCF per day to in the order of 3.8, significant increase, we are still at this time below the comfortable level that we need to be at 4.1 to 4.2 million BCF per day. So what we were facing and what we are facing is an insufficiency of gas. We can use more gas. However, there were other issues that had to be addressed. And I've prepared a summary statement which my staff will make available to you electronically after, that covers all that I'm going to be saying to you here, so you will have it in a way that you will not be confused by what I'm saying, and to get everything very clearly. There's a 5-page document that's going to come to you after we finish this. But the bottom line is this: contracts would have come to an end, or were about to end. In 2015, there was no negotiation for new contracts for gas in this country. The National Gas Company, being an aggregator of gas, buying from the upstream and selling to the Point Lisas plants, was in a position that if there was no gas price agreement, Trinidad and Tobago's gas business at the end of 2018 would have come to a halt, because there was no gas available, because there was no gas price negotiated. Some contracts had ended and others were month-to-month contracts. That was the state of affairs. Also, there was the whole question of who was earning what from what was being sold. It turned out that there was one instance where the Minister of Energy has pointed out to me that in one particular month, in one particular situation, it was such that we were virtually paying others to extract the gas, because we as a country got nothing in return and might have been owing those who extracted it. The bottom line here was that we had to take this issue of who is earning what, and whether in fact the earnings for Trinidad and Tobago can be addressed, negotiated, and improved in any way. We also had the liabilities, billions of dollars in claims made against the NGC. And of course, the NGC being 100% owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and a major contributor to the national budget, those claims literally put the NGC in a most invidious position. Add to that, that the NGC's working capital and investment capital, all $16 billion of it, was frittered away by 2015, with no significant investment made. And of course, if I go further, there was the question of TNTEC's debt to NGC in the order of $700 million US, which is not being paid or serviced in any way in a country where energy conservation does not form part of the conversation. In parallel with that, we can go further and talk about the situation at Petrotrin, which everybody's a commentator on now, but which nobody wanted to address. A refining business that was guaranteed to lose $2 billion a year, and an oil production effort that was falling like a stone. We are now producing 60,000 barrels a day, and we were importing 100,000 barrels a day and losing significant billions. It fell to this government to address all of this. How did we proceed? I was out last week, and in connection back with Trinidad and Tobago, the biggest point that the opposition could make is why is Minister Young on the trip with the Prime Minister? And that tells me that there are people in this country who like to be on center stage but have no performance to make. Because if that was the biggest issue, why Minister Young was on the trip, then clearly they either didn't understand it or they don't care. And let me tell you why Minister Young was on the trip. It was because the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago takes these matters very seriously. They're not popularity contests, because in dealing with them, whether at Petrotrin, whether at the board of BP or at the board of Shell or at the Energy Ministry, these are matters that have serious consequences and are treated very seriously. So one of the first things this government did was to re-establish the Energy Subcommittee of the Cabinet, which was chaired by the Prime Minister and contained all the personnel in the energy sector, private and public sector, who were willing and who had expertise to afford us a proper understanding of this problem that I've just mentioned. The Energy Subcommittee met on a number of occasions and addressed these issues that I'm talking about here. There was something else that we had to do. There was a report done on the energy sector, the gas sector, the gas master plan, which was available before the elections, but which was not spoken to or spoken about. It fell to this government to examine that gas master plan and face the realities contained therein. And what I just mentioned to you there, the whole question of the state of the energy sector, the gas sector, was largely in that master plan. One of the things it pointed out was our position vis-a-vis revenues. And it was held out to us by the experts that we hired, because we did hire experts to assist us in treating with this matter. Because you don't go to international companies like Shell and BP and EOG to talk to them or to negotiate based on a whim or fancy. You go based on fact, you go based on evidence, you go based on competence and respect. So we had Portland & Partners, who are experts in this sort of business, to advise the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and we hired a major law firm, White & Case, because it's all about contracts. And the government's team buckled down to that. Before we did that, we went public here in Trinidad and Tobago. And some of you were there. Some of you might have paid attention. Your establishment certainly would have paid attention to what we call the Spotlight on Energy, where we brought before the national community the situation. We didn't go into all the details, but we brought to the country the situation with respect to our energy business and the seriousness with which the government was approaching it. And among that, one of the most important things was that the government intended to open discussions with the major companies about this question about who gets what from the earnings of our business here in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, at that time, there were those who felt that that was a very bad thing to do, because, as they said, we would be driving foreign investment from the country, because what we need to do is to give them more incentives, and so on and so on. But we felt that it was possible for us to raise these matters in every way and to negotiate with the companies that are involved. And those negotiations, in our first pass with the companies, we agreed between the companies and the government, Shell and the government in particular, the Shell, because Shell was the main one, because Shell had just bought out BG and a number of other companies here, and Shell is now a major player in the LNG business in Trinidad and Tobago. And we agreed that we would put what we call empowering teams, empowered negotiating teams, to sit down and go over these issues. Teams of expert personnel who had the authority to negotiate for. That's why they were called empowered, that they had the authority to negotiate and come to decisions over the table. They had their empowered team, we had our empowered team. And we set time frames within which the issues would be dealt with. And we come to positions which the parties could agree to sign off on. And this has gone on for quite some time. And as one of the clips just showed you, we had set ourselves to conclude this with Shell at the end of the first quarter of 2019, which would have been, that's the end of March. So by April, we were expecting. It went a little longer than we expected, but by end of March, we were well within sight of concluding. And we tidied those things up in April, and only then I was able to intervene and to travel around and sign off at Shell on what we call phase one of those negotiations. And we had concluded with BP the very sticky matter of the future of Train 1, because you would have been told early on that the contract and the life of Train 1 had come to an end contractually in 2019, and the partners, and we are a partner, we are a 10% shareholder in that business, and the other shareholders, but the biggest one was BP, and BP and Shell, but BP is the main supplier of gas to it and so on, and these partners all had to decide what would be the future of Train 1. But most importantly, Shell becoming the owner of the business that it came into in Trinidad and Tobago, and being approached by us on the whole question of revenues to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, in the face of what we had raised with them on this whole question of improved revenues for Trinidad and Tobago, Shell's position had always been that we have broken no law and we are operating these contracts within the law. So there was no legal basis for us to make demands of that nature for past revenue streams. However, we did bring them to a position where some kind of accommodation could be had, even though there was no legal basis on which we could press a legal claim. But more importantly, in talking to these companies, the negotiation has brought us to a place where we are now in agreement. In the case of Train 1, we negotiated a new formula going forward for Train 1, which by virtue of that formula for distributing the revenues, that the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago would have been put in a more advantageous position. Unfortunately, just as we agreed to do that for the extension of 5 years, the question of the unavailability of gas reared its head again. The same gas that was not available before, which is not available now for Train 1. And of course, it has nothing to do with maintenance. It has to do with gas availability to the business. And of course, but what is important is that that new formula has been agreed to. And more importantly, we do not now own any shareholding in Trains 2 and Train 3, and we have an 11% shareholding in Train 4. But the formula that we negotiated that is advantageous to us in Train 1, we are in the process of concluding negotiations with respect to the shareholding of Trains 2, 3, and 4, and that the formula of Train 1 is what we expect to apply going forward into the other 3 trains. And that will put Trinidad and Tobago in a much better position than we are now and that we were before. So these are the kinds of negotiations that we engage in. And as we concluded the negotiation with Shell in April, my visit to Shell and BP and others had the other important objective, and that was to eliminate from the conversation, in the face of this gas curtailment and insufficiency of gas, in the face of that, to eliminate from it this understanding, if you may call it that, that Trinidad and Tobago, this mature province, wasn't one where further significant investments could be considered. because we were facing a situation where some of these companies were beginning to look at Trinidad and Tobago as a place where maybe we have passed the peak, and therefore other areas were demanding and receiving the investments. That we had to make sure that we keep Trinidad and Tobago in the investment spotlight with all these companies. For example, when I went to Australia the other day, one of the main aspects of my visit was to get to the board of BHP, the people who make decisions in BHP in Melbourne, because that company was looking at its worldwide business and withdrawing from certain kinds of businesses back into what it's called its core business in Australia. And in fact, it came out of its shale business, its shale gas business in America and other kinds of business, and was in fact considering Trinidad and Tobago as a place where we had to justify our existence and justify our attraction to attract the investment at the level of the top of BHP, so that we could continue to have in Trinidad and Tobago BHP as a company that is investing in our future. BHP is the company that's now operating in the deep water, 85 miles east of Tobago, close to the Barbados border. And we are here in the deep water for the first time, doing wells, and of course, hoping to be successful. The company would have mentioned recently what successes we had. We've had some fair success so far. We've had some disappointments very early in the proceedings. But what the government has done to encourage that, as part of the discussion we've had with BHP, to keep our exploration going in those areas, is we've been very flexible with respect to where wells are drilled and how many wells are drilled. The original contracts required exploration wells across a wide acreage, and initially we were unsuccessful in one area, but one exploration well was very successful in another area, and we cooperated with the company in making changes to the arrangements to allow them to do more drilling in the area where we were successful, which seemed to be the common sense thing to do. And of course, that company is moving in that area and further south, and conducting significant exploration at the moment. And as we keep our fingers crossed, we hope to continue to get the success that we have. We've been trying to maintain Trinidad and Tobago as a place to invest. We met with EOG yesterday, both EOG and BHP, and we were able to sit down with them, and they showed us some of their confidential data. And we had some discussions around what this means for further investment and aggressive exploration in the areas where the seismics appear to be attractive. And we are also encouraging, as we've encouraged with Heritage, the use of improved technology. Shell has agreed to make its improved technology available to us in the Soldado field, where we can very quickly have a better look at what is available and to be more, to be less exposed to risks as we choose where the drilling should be done. And so because the improved technology allows for a lowering of risk. There's always risk when you go drilling. There's always a chance, especially in our environment, of lots of broken thrust faults and so on, and small pools as against very expansive horizons. In our area, you have to be a little more specific, a little more experienced, because we do have a kind of geology that allows you to miss 80 feet away from where the real stuff is. So that kind of environment is one where you want to lower the risk. And using the technologies that we don't have in our companies, but which is available to us from other companies, partnering with them will allow us to do a much better job in drilling, both in the shallow water and in deeper horizons, and also to go deeper, with deeper wells in areas that warrant that kind of exploration. So those are the kinds of things that we have been discussing with the companies that are involved, and I can report to you that all of those companies that we have been talking to, Shell, BP, EOG, and BHP, have agreed to make that extra effort, put that extra step forward to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago receives a significant portion of their investment funds and that we do as much exploration as we can. On the question of the small pools of gas, which for some of the bigger companies hitherto would have been left unattended, in all the areas where we are close to infrastructure, Shell and BP in particular, and EOG to a certain extent, have agreed and are currently engaged in redoubling their efforts. And in the coming weeks and months, you will hear more and more from the companies themselves and from the ministry as to what new wells are going to be drilled or are planned to be drilled between here and 2021. We have a number of projects underway now. I was very pleased to have been made party to the programs going forward to 2021, 2022, 2023, starting now, and also to see that we are presenting Trinidad and Tobago not as a mature area for which investment is few and far between, but given a better understanding of the geological environment, that we are an area of exploration. We remain an area where exploration is still attractive. And that is what we see going forward. A lot more exploration in and around Trinidad and Tobago, in the mature fields, at deeper horizons, and in the new areas. So we are very confident that in the months and years ahead that we would see a lot of activity in Trinidad and Tobago, looking for gas, and in some areas focusing on oil as well. And I will leave the details of that for the Minister of Energy, who will make a statement in the Parliament on tomorrow. And we will continue to keep you abreast of these developments as they go forward. There are two things I want to mention. One is that our recent negotiating efforts have resulted in us concluding, as I said a while ago, a new formula at Train 1, which would put us in a better position earnings-wise. And also, we were able to negotiate with Shell in such a way that we would be in receipt of additional revenues going forward, and also that the new formula would involve a better position for us with respect to trains 2, 3, and 4 going forward. So the whole question of improved earnings would be something that is very welcome by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the details of which will come to you as appropriate going forward. One of the things that we had to face was, because of our boldness in treating with this matter, if I may put it that way, we had to be reminded by the company involved that Trinidad and Tobago is but one area in the world, one of very many areas where they are engaged in this business. And pampering Trinidad and Tobago would not do well for them in talking to their other partners and countries in which they operate. So we had to walk that very thin line. And even as we extract benefits and cooperation, we have to bear in mind that we would have exhausted our legal pressures. And of course, even as we were making those demands, we had to be mindful of the fact that they were making demands of us too. So even as we now conclude what we say as phase 1 of phase 2 and 3 to come, we are still exposed to significant claims, quite substantial claims from some companies for whom we had not supplied gas that we were contracted to supply. And the wherewithal with which NGC can handle these matters have put the NGC in a position where the NGC is not simply a cash cow for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, but it has serious liabilities as well, being the aggregator and buyer and seller of gas to our gas business in the country. As we stand now, I can tell you that all the issues that we have been dealing with, all the issues that we have to deal with going forward, it would take a clear view of what can be done, what has been accomplished, and the response of the companies have been reasonable, and it's against that background that we could refrain from telling you that the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago was in a crisis or is in a crisis, and we are having to work our way out of it. We are not saying that we are in crisis, but we are saying, had we not done what we had done, have we not engaged as we are engaging now, and if we were not getting the kinds of responses that we are getting, Trinidad and Tobago would have been in a very serious crisis, because the collapse of the energy sector around the gas business, starting from billions owed that you couldn't pay, from revenues that you were foregoing, that you could not collecting, from investments not being made, and from production levels collapsing in the absence of a gas price to have spurred on those investments. All of those things, that perfect storm of all those negatives, could easily have collapsed our energy sector. We believe that what we have concluded in April and what we have signed off on now and what is coming to us, we have dodged that bullet, and the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago going forward, 2019 going forward, is in a much better position now than it was when we took this responsibility in 2015. The Minister will speak a bit more on this matter in the Parliament tomorrow, and of course, as we go forward, we'll keep you informed. I just want to make one other comment, and that is, there's this view being peddled by some people in this country now about secret government and secrecy. This government has no benefit to get from hiding information from the population. As a matter of fact, we don't want to panic the population as we could have done since September 2015. We give you the assurance that in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a government that takes its responsibility very seriously, and we have the competence and the faith in our nation to treat with very, very difficult matters, not the least of which is sitting down across the table from multinational corporations and negotiating or discussing the business of Trinidad and Tobago. But there are some commercial business where confidentiality is valuable. I've seen in one of your editorials reference to this business about secrecy and comparing Trinidad and Tobago with other countries. Let me just point out something to you all. You don't compare apples and oranges and get the same thing. We in Trinidad and Tobago, we are a very peculiar model. We're not the only country where hydrocarbons, oil and gas, that is the lifeblood of the country, and the economy is lopsided in not being very diversified, but relies very heavily on those two products. But in Trinidad and Tobago, our model is one, the government, the state, owns the resources, the acreage, and lease it out to international companies particularly to bring the investment funds to do the drilling and produce a product at the wellhead. We have that. We also have a state company controlling the lion's share of aggregating the gas, contracting to buy it at the wellhead, and contracting to sell it downstream to the users like at Point Leases. And of course, we have the state being the main driver of the national economy, driving the economy through its earnings from oil and gas. So when we talk about what we can do here in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, a matter of the gas price, I would not be surprised if the first question I get from one of you this evening, what is the gas price? And we say to you, excuse me, we say to you, as we have been saying to you since the 70s, at the price that gas is available in Trinidad and Tobago is a commercial secret. Because not everybody pays the same price. And for good reason. When you go into high-low and you ask them for a tin of milk, you didn't ask them how much to pay the person who bought the milk. You determine whether the price of milk is reasonable and affordable. But the price of the gas in Trinidad and Tobago is important. It may not be as important in another country where you don't have an aggregator owned by the state, and you don't have the state buying up front and selling downstream. So you have to protect your trade secret. If you don't, well then it might be a good thing to put it on the front page of the newspaper, fine. But then just bear in mind that when you go to the next person, and let me just give you an example of what happened here. And this gas price story. Just a little example. The Manning government, of which I was a part, in wanting to develop the Labre community, Labre Point 14, and with Point Lisas being filled out with business, gave a gas price to a particular company and used the gas price to attract that company to Trinidad and Tobago and to the location in Labre. That gas price was a better gas price than companies in Point Lisas were having, because Point Lisas was a developed facility, developed environment with all the infrastructure and so on, and they were paying a higher gas price than the company that was going to go and start the business and open up for the people of Labre Point 14 by putting that plant down there. It's called a greenfield environment, greenfield price, right? Because they would have had to put everything in and start from scratch down there. That was contracted, and the company came to Trinidad and Tobago to do that on that agreement. The government changed. The new government then allowed that company to not build its plant in Labre, but to build it in Point Lisas, but kept the gas price that they got to attract them to Labre. The minute that happened, the rest of the companies wanted to find out what price they were paying for their gas. And of course they found out. And they then started to say, well, we too have to get a kind of benefit. Significant losses came to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But recently I have heard, and I have not confirmed the details of it yet, but somewhere along the way, I have heard that in some court matter, in some kind of arbitration in this particular matter, this company was able to get the court to rule a gas price for the company, which would mean that the NGC must buy the gas at a higher price and give it to the company at a lower price. That's just one part of the conundrum of the crisis that exists in the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. So the gas price is an important trade secret. And that's just only one little example. And of course, until we execute the new models to get the full benefits, I ask you to be patient in accepting that we have, in fact, new formulae which will give us better earnings. And of course, there are some settlements that you will be told about in the coming not too distant future in terms of quantums of improvements. So we have improved our position, but let us not get carried away by this demand for information which, if made public at particular times, could in fact harm our ability to negotiate and to get the best. You would hear members of the opposition demanding what I just told you. I want you to ask them one question. How many times did they tell you the gas price when they were in government? And there's one particular gas price that they would never have told you because they did something in secret that is now of great concern to us. Because there's one particular plant, there's one plant that came into being under their stewardship where they've contracted us to a guaranteed loss position going forward. Guaranteed loss position. And you'll hear more about that in the future. And of course, they had changed the policy without advising the country that our gas allocation policy had changed. In 2015, the last government changed the policy to one which said that if there's a shortage of gas, as there is, as there was, as there has been, that gas will go to the new company as against going to the older companies in Point Lisas. What that would have done is to leave us in a position where we have this guaranteed loss position in the new company going forward. But every company in Point Lisas that would have been so affected would have continued to make these billion-dollar claims against the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It was Minister Young acting as part of the government's response to these problems, an experienced lawyer, being a member of the cabinet, appointed to the office of the Prime Minister for good reason, who was detailed to go to Japan to talk to the Japanese government to get them to relinquish that aspect of the contract into which we were tied. And of course, with respect to all the negotiations that were taking place in the last 2 years, Minister Young, at the office of the Prime Minister, was a significant part of the government's team. I also mentioned to you earlier on, former Minister of Finance Motley came in to assist, and we had the expert help. We had our team of negotiators. And for that reason, Minister Young was an integral part of this trip that I made to all the oil companies that you mentioned about. So for those who wanted to know why Minister Young was there, he was there because he was an integral part, a successful part of Trinidad and Tobago's effort in improving the circumstances to which we were attached in 2015. And today I want to personally congratulate him for his energy and his skill and the success that he has brought on these matters. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them for you at this time. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Ali. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
I'm from the...
What's the name again?
I'm Carla Bridgewell from the...
Carla Bridgewell. I think I know that name.
No, I'm concerned. I'm not going to ask you what's the gas price, but can you tell us, and can you give us an idea of the value of the foreign direct investment that came out of this trip?
I would say it's significant, but I would leave it to the Minister of Energy to go into whatever details he would want to go into at this time. But it is not insignificant.
Billion, do you think?
Probably.
Now, you refer to yourself as the salesman of the chief salesman of the country. Can you give us a little bit of insight on how you convince these companies? You mentioned in your speech just now that, you had to convince them to give investment to Trinidad rather than anywhere else. Can you give us some insight in exactly what your pitch was?
Well, the best way of doing that is to put your country's best position forward. And I could tell you one thing, that there are very few companies in the world, there are very few countries in the world where the government can speak to the technical people in those companies about their seismic lines and their downhole pressures. Trinidad and Tobago is the only government that had 4 geologists at one time. Now we only the government of Trinidad and Tobago understands that they are investors and they need to make a proper return, but by the same token, that we too are in the business, as we are with NGC, and that we would want to make a good living off what is in effect a good product. And I think that is a good starting point.
Given the feedback that you received, and in that context, the recent shallow water bid round, that was fairly disappointing. What then is your outlook for the long term, the medium to long term outlook for Trinidad and Tobago's energy industry, not just the short term, which you've tried to resolve in this recent trip?
Well, disappointing is your term, eh?
Minister of Energy
We, we sat down with those companies over the bid round. And for us, it's not disappointing. In fact, what you're seeing is a response to today's environment. It's a changed environment. And that's something else that I didn't mention, the whole question of how changed the environment is. We were selling gas to the United States at good prices and making good money. Today, the United States is our biggest competitor in these parts, right? They're selling gas in markets that we would have liked to sell into. And of course, the price at which they are making gas available at the Henry Hub is but a fraction of what the rest of the world is buying. And we have arrangements that make Henry Hub our reference point. But the thing is that you've got to be able to let people be comfortable that Trinidad is a place where they can invest, make a good margin. In fact, one of the companies that I spoke to, I had to ask the company, they drill a well in America for $5 million, but they drill a well in Trinidad for $50 million. And I'm saying, well, why Trinidad and Tobago? And they said, well, we still make money in Trinidad and Tobago. So how do you do that? And the answer is because we drill more efficiently than others in Trinidad and Tobago. And if there's money to be made, whether we're still making money in America, much more. But if there's money to be made in Trinidad and Tobago, we'll invest in Trinidad and Tobago.
Do you think these companies are so receptive to speak with you simply because they have been established here for so long, and to leave would be more expensive than to stay?
It's not simply a question of speaking with me. I'm just an office holder. Trinidad and Tobago to them is a geological location. And they will only invest here if there's money to be made. So you got to encourage them to ensure that when they allocate their investment monies, that some of it comes to Trinidad and Tobago, because that which you invest in Trinidad and Tobago will bring you a return. Because rest assured, if there's no return to be had, they would not come. So it's a question of what are you interested, encourage them into. And basically, that's where the government comes in. And if there are things that the government could do to make that encouragement attractive. For example, we have about 90 leases in BP now, which need to be reviewed and renewed, as the case might be. We can act on those, and we've agreed to act on those with some dispatch. Because if money is to be invested, they're not going to invest money in licenses that will expire in 2 or 3 or 5 years. They need investment. You need to have the leases longer term. But also, as we do that, we need to understand what are the terms and conditions in these leases. How do we renew these leases so that Trinidad and Tobago could ensure that we get a proper return from any success as the drilling goes forward? So these are the things that we talk about and that we do. And we've committed to getting leases renewed, extending periods, and whether we're dealing with production sharing contracts, and there are certain things in there which we have concerns about, which we can accelerate or which we can tweak. So these are the kinds of things that are happening now.
Can you just tell me then what sort of time frame them into the future? Is it like a 10-year plan that you're looking at, or like a 20-year sort of plan?
Immediate to indefinite. Some things are immediate, some things are long-term. For example, with the negotiations that have been going on, which we concluded in April, we have a 60-day window to close off, sign off, pay off in that window for that aspect of it. There are other things that we have a longer horizon to bring about an investment decision on platform construction, giving the clearance to go forward with certain kinds of developments. Also, in order to bring gas in, because as you keep consuming gas today, if you don't replace it by gas, new gas, then your reserves keep falling. So if you're going to stay in the business in 2021, 22, 25, 30, you've got to do certain things now to ensure that they make those investments now. Right? So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about.
Is there going to be a change in legislation for any of these things? But, for example, the new formula with Atlantic?
These are contracts. covered by the existing legislation. But if there requires legislation from time to time, well, the government has never been hesitant to do that. So, but it's not really a legislation thing. It is largely how the contracts are agreed to, what you are agreeing to in the contracts, and what the contracts apply to.
From CNC3, and on the note of the new formula being negotiated, could you just provide a little bit more details about it? Is it that gas will not be supplied? Is that the possible temporary closure of Train 1? Will it be averted?
Well, I'm not the Minister of Energy. I'd leave those details for the Minister of Energy. I just wanted to say that the Train 1 situation, we discussed that with the companies. There's a period of review that has to take place. Unfortunately, just as the new agreement had come into being, we had these setbacks with these 3 wells, one of which didn't have anything to do with the Train 1. But if you didn't have the kind of output that you expected once, twice, you really have to review. What we try to get is an acceleration of that review. So some persons have jumped to the question of talking about mothballing Train 1 and so on. We're not there. We are at a review stage, right? And what we did agree was a 5-year extension. Well, then that it has a period of life that we've already agreed to after that. So we'll wait and see what the review throws up.
Just to clarify, this trip was planned then before the news about Train 1?
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned the claims to the NGC. Can you tell us the value of those claims?
Offhand, just thinking aloud, is in the order of a few $1 billion. And of course, it was much larger than that. As part of the negotiation which took place in the last year and a half, one of the things that we were able to do as we negotiated was to negotiate away some of those claims. But we still have significant claims which we have not closed out on, which we have not been able to negotiate away.
Our claims to the companies, I think it was like $6 billion or something you had mentioned in Spotlight. Are we going to forego those claims now?
No. Those claims, what I tried to mention earlier on, we saw where revenue, which had things been different, we could have had revenue of that nature. However, the company's position is that, yes, we see it too, but it was in the contract. So we don't have a legal basis to enforce that. But what we have is an outcome that changes the formula so that we don't continue along that pathway.
Prime Minister Joe Rao from TV6 News. The agreement that your office had announced with Shell when you met with the top executives there in the Netherlands. Anything else you could give us outside of what had been announced? You said it would be a benefit to the nation and so on. Any other details?
Well, it's all about benefit. It's about we're going to get some enhanced revenue. We got a new formula which will make that enhanced revenue sustainable going forward, and of course a significant investment program in the search for more resources. So, the whole question of the shareholding in Atlantic LNG, that's a major development. We are aiming to review and restructure the shareholding in the LNG business in Trinidad and Tobago. We currently have shareholding in Train 1 and Train 4. We have none in Train 2 and Train 3. We are negotiating towards a position where that situation will be different going forward. So we are clear. We also ended up, as part of the negotiations on Train 1, that we would end up with cargoes which we ourselves can market. Because what that will do, it allows us to sell that cargo at the highest price in the best market, as against being stuck with somebody else marketing it for us in their lowest market. So these are the nuances of the business that we've been trying to tease out to get a better position for Trinidad and Tobago.
So is your expectation then coming out of these discussions, for example, the budget is coming up very soon for the next fiscal year, the September, October, thereabouts, in terms of what impact that could have for the next financial year going forward?
Well, it would have some kind of impact, but specificity is a bit absent at this point in time. It all depends on what volumes we sell, what the shareholding ends up to be, and of course, if we are hoping that some of the enhanced revenue that we are entitled to at this point in time can actually come in towards the end of this fiscal year. So it will 2019 we begin to benefit from it as we have negotiated.
What would you say, Prime Minister, would be the biggest accomplishment? I mean, you outlined some things, yes, but there may be those who might say, well, what would be the most significant thing that would be new outside of the long-standing discussions your government has had with Shell, EOG, and so on?
The enhanced revenue and the new formula to bring about that enhanced revenue would be the most significant thing. Because you remember, we are dealing here with large volumes over a long period of time. Some of these contracts are long-term contracts. So if the method by which you earn is changed so that you earn more over the long term, you would earn a lot more. So I would say that was the best thing. And then, of course, if the formula is better, and then the second best thing would be the shareholding. Who gets what? How much of it do you get by virtue of your shareholding? And of course, we do get some consideration for some of the outstanding issues which we have brought to table and got some agreement from the companies to pay us some monies along those lines.
So just to clarify, as it stands then, the 5-year extension plan for Atlantic...
That's a train one. For train one
Atlantic is still...
Yes, that is yes.
Okay. And how much, in terms of the long-term outlook for Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector, how much does cross-border fields with Venezuela play into that sort of outlook?
With Venezuela? Well, as a matter of fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the agreements we've got with Shell, you know Shell bought Chevron, and Chevron was a part holder in the Manatee aspect of Loran Manatee. We own a portion of that field, and one of the things that we agreed to do, and the government encouraged Shell to do, is to move towards production of the Manatee aspect of Loran Manatee. And there are some legal aspects of things to deal with there, but we've agreed to go forward with that. It would involve talking to the Venezuelan government, but not as tricky as talking about Dragon, which is all Venezuelan. We'll be talking to them in the context of that unifying agreement that we have. So we go forward talking about that with a view to being able to focus on investment on Manatee while they keep some control of Loran for the time being.
What's that outlook then?
More medium term. More that we would regard as a medium term thing. But it would be it's like knowing for certain you've got something that you can use, and compare that with the exploration that you expect to find something that you can use. So that's one of the areas that we also focused on this trip. Dragon, work is, interestingly enough, work is still going on at the level of the companies on the Dragon matter, because what we signed, I mean, it's a little disheartening the way some Trinidad spokespersons refer to this Dragon thing as though, well, I'm glad it's not going to happen. There are some people in this country who, when you hear them talk, you believe that, for God's sake, they think that they wish the worst for us. We signed a memorandum of understanding, a heads of agreement between the governments. That seemed to have annoyed some people. I saw one of our former minister of government, the Dragon deal dead. Well, at least try and go to the funeral with some clean clothes, right? Show some respect for the dead. It's not dead. There are issues in Venezuela now. Venezuela is under U.S. sanction, which affects us because it prevents Venezuela and prevents companies that we have an interest in doing business with Venezuela. However, in our expectation that Venezuela wouldn't always be in this situation, there will be sometime in the future, whether the distant future or the near future, we expect that the Venezuelan condition would improve, both in terms of the governance and in terms of its condition. The companies below the heads of agreement between the government of Venezuela and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, there's need there below there for the companies who will work under that umbrella to enter into contractual arrangement. Shell was a partner in there. There's Shell, there's NGC, and there's PDVSA. That work is going on because that is not affected by any trade sanctions. But of course, to move from there into any production, you need to have a change of what exists now. But the work is going on, and that's one of the things that we were advised on when we went to at Shell. We reached the stage now where there exists a commercial term sheet, which includes a gas price, which we don't talk about. Because the gas price, as I told you, in this business is a trade secret between the Venezuelan company, Trinidad and Tobago National Gas Company, and Shell.
Sorry, so if it's going on, do we have a projected timeline for that to go on? You know, we have to ask you that one. And just to clarify, the sanctions.
I'm sure you will appreciate that any timeline for this particular aspect of business will be heavily influenced, if not controlled by, the timeline for the return to normalcy in Venezuela.
Could you say when was the last set of meetings between the two teams from the two countries on this matter?
Well, they're company teams. Shell and Venezuelan companies, they're in constant communication and they're sharing data. That's an ongoing business. Yeah, we are partnering with Shell in that gas jargon matter. Shell and PDVSA personnel are in constant communication and sharing data. Right? And of course, but that has to be done against the background that there are sanctions applying to Venezuelan business.
The sanctions shouldn't apply to Manatee Gas, though, right? Because that would be.
It all depends on who is handling Manatee Gas. Okay. So Shell is an international company. Yeah? I just met with Shell in Houston. That's an American city. So we have complications, huh?
So if the two sides come to an arrangement, it will just be for the two governments
no, the governments are pretty much out. We've gone past the government stage, you know. The heads of agreement between the government is what we signed in Caracas. And I think you were there, Ms. Bridgler. Yeah. So now, after that, the next level of thing is between the companies. We have a company that is a partner in there, which is NGC. Shell is a major partner, big international company, and PDVSA. Work has to be done to come to the point of executing that. At the company level, the doors are still open, people are still talking, right? And data being exchanged and so on.
It's your Venezuela. We don't have an ambassador in Caracas yet. Is there plans?
We do not have an ambassador in Venezuela, but you have an embassy. You have a functioning embassy. So we are represented in Venezuela, and we run much of it out of headquarters here.
As of now, it's okay that we
have an embassy. We have a functioning embassy in Venezuela, contrary to what I heard one person of access to the media going on the media here and saying now that we have closed our embassy in Venezuela. I don't know why. I shouldn't say I don't. I think I know why. But this level of misinformation in Trinidad and Tobago, you have to just be careful with it. We took the ambassador who was in Venezuela as one of the senior people that we have, and we used him for a short while as an inspector of missions, and he went off and did an assignment for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we'll put somebody in again very soon. But the embassy is functioning.
So the issue of Venezuela, did you receive an update as you returned first cabinet meeting since your trip on the issue of the registration of Venezuelan nationals in Trinidad and Tobago and the migration at the centers and so on?
I received an update continuously. As head of the as National Security Council chairman, I'm informed whether I'm in or out of the country. I'm informed of matters of national security in Trinidad and Tobago, so I've been kept abreast of all that has happened, and I'm quite pleased with what is going on. and how we are handling it, and I look forward to the completion of the process, and we will just keep doing what we have to do to ensure that we are positioned. I very deliberately and very carefully from this very podium, before I went away, established Trinidad and Tobago's position very clearly for all to see and hear, and that position remains.
The numbers that have been registered thus far appear to be fairly far removed from the numbers that have been bandied by some of the international agencies. So is it that are you satisfied with the rate of the registration? And is it that we may have to consider extending the time, the 2-week period, given what may be a slow process of registration?
We assessed the situation using our estimation of what we were dealing with. We are also aware that there were persons whose agendas would have been better served by inflating the numbers. We heard the opposition talking about 60,000 people, some people talking about 40,000 people. We had a feel as to what kind of numbers we're dealing with, and against that background, logistically, we felt that in the period that we put there, which ends on mid-June, sometime in mid-June, on the 14th of June, persons who require to be registered would have been given appropriate time to register. We will assess it at the end of the period, and only at that time we will be able to tell you more definitively what the number is as we register them. If there are persons who allow that period to pass and put in large numbers and not bring themselves forward for registration, we have to be cognizant of that and understand what that means too. What we did, of course, we did so maintain our border patrols that we didn't have the kinds of floods of people that some people were anticipating. We pretty much were confined to those who were already within our borders. And when we get the number at the end of the period, we will assess it. If it turns out that there are people who have not been registered and there's a requirement to register them after, we will consider it, but we are not now holding that out as any prospect. What we are saying to them, if you do not come forward and get registered and you remain here illegally, then you would be facing removal. We are not going to run this as a continuous process. We will know who we're dealing with. We will then be able to determine the nature of the assignment we have within our border. It is for 1 year. I've seen questions being asked about what's going to happen after a year. Well, we have to assess the situation. If the Venezuelan situation has worsened after a year, then we will expect a certain kind of response. If it has improved after a year, we will expect a certain kind of response. We've given ourselves a year to treat with the issue. And as we get to the end of that period, you'll be in a much better position to take a position as to how we should close this off. Right? However, what we have done is to limit our involvement in providing space and resources to Venezuelans who are fleeing. And that was the number one requirement. Limit our exposure to that.
Does the government have a position on the possibility of marriages of convenience taking place within the year thing to bypass that 1 year limit? Or
I just want to say something to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that we, more than anybody else, should know how to live in other people's country. Because there's hardly a country in the world where there are not members of your family, in some instances, and our nationals, from Cyprus to Argentina, from London to Canada, where immigrants do all kinds of things. And if Venezuelans fall in love with Trinidadians, they say, you want to be the one to say you're not in love?
that's why I'm asking you, because
No, but I must say, I mean, some countries do turn down obvious marriage of convenience if the facts show that you are really abusing the hospitality. But I don't know that we should, dive so deeply into it to want to put regulations on that. Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, we've had a long history of association, way back. And now this particular development in Venezuela has forced us to be a little more forthcoming, but being very careful not to encourage mass migration to our shores. Because some of the advice we were getting, both local and international, would have resulted in mass migration here. But we have been very careful to say no to those exhortations. But on the other hand, we do have some people within our borders who we expect to be made welcome, and that we would share with them what is reasonable. And as some people would say, or have said, we expect that this too will pass.
You said that you would be limiting the space and the resources. But of course, and the Minister of Finance, that is in keeping with what he said too, because I think he said that education and health and so on would not be included. But there are a number, but not one particular, the Catholic schools, the denominational schools, have been making room for some of the Venezuelan children. So there is an element in which government, which provides financial assistance,
I understand.
Would have to absorb.
We have to be very careful what we're talking about. If the Catholic Church, in its pastoral work, gets involved with trying to educate children who are not going to school, that is acceptable in Trinidad and Tobago. If there are people in our borders who are authorized to be here, but who are being denied certain basic human rights, then the country has already signed on to certain kinds of minimum standards that should be met. However, in terms of the right to settlement and the right to claim, we have to ensure that whatever we do not create liabilities for ourselves where we are unable to discharge those liabilities. But in terms of a church or an NGO or volunteers assisting in any way, not the least of which in educating, getting children to speak the language, if those things are done, I would think that those are positive.
These are schools.
But you did say Catholic school, eh? Don't forget, the Catholic school is a Catholic school. The government's association with the Catholic school is through the Concordat, but it's a Catholic school. Okay? I hope you understand that, right?
Yes, but I'm saying that in supporting the school financially, therefore the statements being made that the government is not absorbing certain costs, there is a cost to the government in
Well, I don't know. It all depends on what they're going to be doing. If the school decides to take in certain people in their pastoral work, I don't know that the government could say to a Catholic school, don't let so-and-so come through your gate. The arrangement we have with the school is under the Concordat, and as long as they are discharging that to the government, I don't know that the government could tell a denominational body what else they can do with their school. But by the same token, if they are taking on liabilities to pass on to the government, and the government is unable or unwilling to carry those liabilities, the government can say so. But let us understand as a people that this that we are being tested with here should bring out the best in us and not the worst in us.
what I'm trying to get at is whether we have a policy in place for all these, because, pardon me? In other words, the registration policy is one thing, but are we thinking ahead of some of the things that may come up?
The minister would have announced it at some time, and I think maybe he might want to assist us with this.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The answer is yes. Immediately when Cabinet took the decision with respect to the registration policy and process, which I think was now about 8 weeks or 7 weeks ago, we announced all of those items. So we said what is applicable in the health system. I even came here and listed up to what level of free health care they can get. We also said with respect to education that there is no guarantee of space in the school, that our first priority is educating our nationals. So all of this talk when they're suggesting that we didn't have proper policies in place is completely untrue. We announced it, we've been reinforcing it. If the Prime Minister would allow me, I went to the Oval this morning, we came back late last night, to witness and to see for myself, because when we were outside and we were reading and getting the reports, you pick up certain things, but it was completely the opposite what I saw this morning. And I commend the men and women in immigration, defense force, police, fire services, who are there on the ground on a daily basis. And it is going very smoothly, and it's a well thought out process that we put in place before.
So, parents,
Child what?
the child is born here. Is there an automatic, does the policy look at an automatic?
You know, once a child is born here, that's a different story.
No, for the parents, I'm talking about the status. Does the child's status automatically entitle the parents to remain here? Give me
No.
Because you can't be heartless.
Well, no, we're not in accordance with the law. But again, as we've said, we will deal with things on a case-by-case basis. Right now, let's focus on the registration process that's taking place. We've asked, I repeated the call this morning, you've heard the Prime Minister repeat it here today, all the Venezuelans who are here in Trinidad and Tobago, come, register before the 14th of June. We're not going to speculate as to what may or may not happen after. But as you say, we are humanitarian and we're not heartless. But we have to deal in accordance with our laws as well.
Instances where some of the women are pregnant, so I'm just...
You see, I really would like my country to be a place where good sense, good order, and humanity prevails. The good order, the good sense is that we don't encourage a situation that worsens our neighbor's condition and put us in a position to be under pressure, more pressure. The good order is that we've come up with a response to what has already happened to us. I see a lot of people taking issue with what we are doing. I'm not seeing their alternative positions, because there's none. A lot of this is not going well, this is not good, this is not right, this is no policy, but they're not telling what the alternative is. I want to remind you, we transported 8 Venezuelans here a while back who agreed to be transported out of our detention center. And I noticed the same set of voices had a lot to say, both at the national and the international level. So you send them back home, it's a big noise. They volunteer and agree to go home. You tell the world that we throw out refugees in breach of the UN Convention. Those who are here, we keep them and we make arrangements to keep them. You don't want them here. So all I'm telling you, there are different voices at different times saying different things. The only consistent in this is the government. Government. Because it is the government that has to do what has to be done. And while I'm on this go, I haven't done it yet, but I intend to do it. And so you're the first to know. I intend to ask the Minister of National Security to bring to the National Security Council an assessment of who we have in the detention center there, particularly Africans, who we have not been able to deport because we have not been able to pay the humongous cost of transporting a deportee from Trinidad to Ghana or Nigeria. There are not many. So since we are on this subject, it's my intention to ask the Minister of National Security to use the authority of his office to bring some relief to those people. Huh? To examine, similarly to the Venezuelans, to examine them, and if there is no reason, no overriding reason, which would prevent us from extending that to them. And I may say, this is as good a time as any to do it, in commemoration of the visit of the President of Ghana here next week, Thursday. So that is an intention to be carried out.
The government looked at, let's say, so you have persons, you've identified them from Venezuela in this instance, they are registered and you have identified those who can stay and work and so on. The issue of whether such persons, while working during the period, pay any sort of taxes or anything like that, sir?
We've taken some steps this morning. One of to make them not required to be registered for NIS, because we don't want them claiming benefits on the NIS. And since the window of opportunity is 1 year, we do not think that they are to be registrants for it, so they will not be they will not have NIS deducted from their earnings anywhere. So there are other things. The employer has to take taxes from people that they employ. You know, employers don't ask you who you are, where you come from, if you're on the payroll. Under the law that governs taxation for them, they have to take the taxes.
So what would be your message, Prime Minister, then to any employers, once the registration process is completed, who are employing persons from Venezuela or elsewhere illegally?
And not paying taxes.
Well, if they are breaking the law, we've made provision now for them to stop breaking the law. Right? Because the persons that they were paying, and of course, most of these people are going to be covered by the non-tax arrangements, $6,000 a month. I mean, let's face it, very few of these people are going to immediately be earning more than $6,000 a month. Any earning in this country up to $6,000 a month is tax-free. So the issue hardly arises. And if there's a qualified Venezuelan who finds a job and is earning much more than that, pay a tax. Simple as that.
The central bank suggested that we access grants.
The what?
The central bank had suggested that we access foreign grants, and the Minister of Finance and acting Prime Minister said the government was not going to consider that because of foreign policy obligations. Can you just explain why the government won't accept grants for relief situations like this, given the number of Venezuelans?
There are grants and there are grants. As Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I could tell you that a lot of the people who are talking around this Venezuelan issue, they have agendas, and some of those agendas come in the form of grants. Their agendas are not our agenda. So they and their grant have been turned down. If there are proper arrangements, particularly through the UN, for dealing with people who are displaced in this way, without strings that we are not afraid of, we will consider it. But those who come running with grants so as to encourage us to run refugee camps in Trinidad and Tobago, the answer is thanks, but no thanks.
Before you left on another matter, you did say you would instruct the Energy Minister to instruct Petrotrin to release the two witness statements that form part of this issue, the Recent Privy Council ruling. As far as you know, have those statements been released by Petrotrin?
All these matters are subject to legal advice. As it is still my expectation, I made the statement, you would recall that Petrotrin did not respond by giving it out because of legal advice that Petrotrin got. Well, my expectation was also subject to legal advice, and we had to do certain things, and we've done that today. We've done that today, and in the not too distant future, we should be in a position to actually carry it out. So, you know what I want done. What I want done is to stop people giving the impression that we are hiding information which is detrimental to the government. We have nothing to hide. But in order to bring it out, there are certain steps that have to be taken, and those steps are being taken. As soon as the legal requirements are met. The Prime Minister's word is not law in this country. It's only an idea in this case. Right? So as soon as they are able to do it legally, they will do it.
And just quickly, going back to energy, given that can you give me a comment, given that the U.S., who you did mention used to be our biggest importer of LNG, just sent out their first export of LNG. What do you think of the changing dynamics of the market?
That's a world market. I mean, we are involved in the world market. We are a small nation, but we are a player in a business that has a world complexion. The prices are set by the world market, the exchange of cargoes, and of course the U.S. has built up its U.S. technology, which has, in the last 5 to 7 years, the U.S. technology has generated oil and gas from areas which hitherto were deemed not to be potential suppliers of those products. The U.S. is now producing for export, and we have to deal with that. One of the things they would have done is to make the prices less attractive because there's more in the marketplace and there are more players. So we are in the marketplace, and that is why we are so concerned about encouraging those who are already with us to stay with us, even though the market is changing in that kind of way. And we build these relationships to ensure that we stay in that business, that international business. We can't tell the U.S. not to export or who to export to or what price to sell at. As a matter of fact, there's some significant discounting taking place in the downstream products because of the U.S. ability to produce more now. And there are more plants being built in the United States. Fertilizer from Trinidad is now competing with fertilizer made in Iowa, whereas before you couldn't get a permit to build a plant. Now, lots of plants are being built inside the United States. So we are now operating in a different market.
Would we in the short term consider importing from them?
Wherever the price is right, if you're in the business, you will. But I don't know that we are doing that. We want to be able to sell to the marketplace, be competitive, be attractive to investment, and therefore be able to sell in the marketplace.
Right, and as of now, has a crisis been averted in the energy sector?
We are working assiduously to avert it, but we do have some very significant issues still. But as we remove them one by one, we get to a better place. The energy sector was in a terrible place. And had we not been able to do what we did in the last 3 years up to now, this weekend, we would have been facing some very dire possibilities, not the least of which, not being able to supply gas in 2018, right? At the end of 2018. If we didn't have a gas price, which caused the producers to produce the gas going forward. Now, we have issues of who's paying what. The market is the price model has a market in front of it. Since then, as you just mentioned, other players are in the market. They're trying to get market share. How do they do that? They do it by discounting prices in the marketplace. So these are business arrangements that we are in, and we want to be able to conduct that business.
And just to be clear, when do these contracts kick in?
Which one?
The ones that you just signed.
Which contract?
The ones that you just signed when you...
Oh, well, I mean, the Minister of Energy, you would have seen one company had shut down its business while they negotiated a price. And then, of course, when they got a price that both parties agreed to.
That's my
as
mistake.
soon
The
as
new formula details
we-
that you just signed.
we give ourselves some time frame, and as soon as the agreements are signed on to and signed off on, they will kick in going forward. Well, I told you, the details as we go forward after today, the Minister of Energy will advise on the details starting tomorrow in the Parliament with a statement in Parliament and further advice going along the way. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we've made progress where those who are involved have agreed to do certain things, and those certain things have to be contracted out. Okay? So I did ask a while ago for some patience. It would require some patience, and please, don't follow the fake news. The government will give you all the information that we are able to give you. Some people don't believe that that is all that we can give you, but the most we can do is tell you, this is what we have now, this is what we're working on, this is what we expect, this is what the outcome is. That's how the government has been, and that is why we have played those clips before, to show you that we are not into knee-jerk actions. We systematically address this issue upon coming into office. As a matter of fact, as we go forward, it's quite possible that we may have another one of these spotlight arrangements on gas in particular, so that we could keep the population properly informed of the business in which we are involved and which is so important to us. Thank you very much.